The air conditioning in the courthouse hallway was set to freezing, a sharp contrast to the way cold sweat made my palms slippery against the leather of my bag. I shifted the weight of the heavy manila folder in my hands, gripping it tight enough to turn my knuckles white, trying desperately to stop my fingers from trembling. Victoria, my mother, reached out and adjusted my collar, her movements sharp and controlling. Her fingers felt like ice against the warmth of my neck. She leaned in close, enveloping me in a suffocating cloud of expensive floral perfume and nervous, frantic energy. "Just say he was confused, Cassidy," she whispered, her voice trembling with a specific kind of grief that sounded perfect for an audience, but hollow to my ears. "Say he forgot things. Say he was aggressive with the staff. Do it for me. Do it for our future." I looked past her perfectly styled blonde hair to the wooden bench where my father, Arthur, sat alone. He looked 10 years older than he did just 9 months ago. He was slumped over, staring at the scuffed floor tiles, wearing a navy suit that now hung loose on his rapidly shrinking frame. He didn't even look at me. Why would he? In his mind, I was the enemy who had abandoned him. The bailiff pushed open the heavy oak doors, the hinges groaning in the silence of the corridor. "All parties for Case 402. I clutched the folder tighter against my chest, feeling the sharp edges of the documents inside pressing against my ribs. My mother patted my arm, a small, confident smile flickering on her lips. She thought I was her star witness, the final nail in my father's coffin. She was absolutely right. I was the star witness, just not for her. Before I tell you what was inside that folder, you need to understand who we were before the world fell apart. My name is Cassidy. I'm 25 years old, a junior analyst, and until recently I thought I had the perfect life. I worked for my parents' company, Prestige Events, and I trusted them more than anyone in the world. 9 months ago, if you looked at our family photos on Instagram, we were the American dream. Mom was the charismatic face of the business, charming clients and closing high-dollar deals. Dad was the quiet, steady hand who handled the logistics, the vendors, and the finances. We were a team. It started at Sunday dinner. The roast was cooked perfectly and the red wine was poured. Mom laughed at something Dad said, but the laugh didn't reach her eyes. It was cold, calculated. "Arthur, did you forget to pay the vendor for the Miller wedding?" she asked casually, slicing her meat with surgical precision. "They called me today, saying the check hasn't cleared." Dad frowned, confused. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone to check the business banking app. "No, I sent the wire Thursday. I have the confirmation email. Let me check the balance." He tapped the screen, then paused, his brow furrowing. "That's weird. My password isn't working. It says invalid credentials." He moved to dial the bank's fraud line immediately. Mom reached over and firmly placed her hand over his phone, pushing it down to the table. "Arthur, stop. They called the house line an hour ago. They said the entire commercial banking system is down for maintenance until Monday morning. You're stressing yourself out for nothing." It was a lie. Banks don't go down for 24 hours without notice, but Dad looked exhausted, his medication making him slow to react. He trusted her. He put the phone away. "Okay," he sighed, rubbing his temples. "We'll go to the branch Monday." I didn't know it then, but she had administratively locked him out an hour before dinner started to prevent him from seeing that the money was already gone. 3 weeks later, the nightmare began in earnest. I pulled into the company parking lot on a rainy Tuesday and saw 2 large, uniformed security guards standing by Dad's sedan. My stomach dropped like a stone. I slammed my car door and ran inside, the rain mingling with the cold sweat breaking out on my forehead. I found Mom in the lobby. She was crying theatrically, surrounded by our confused staff who whispered behind their hands. Dad was standing by his desk, holding a small cardboard box filled with photos. He looked like he had been hit by a truck. He was pale, shaking, and completely blindsided. He drained the operating account. Mom sobbed, her voice pitched loud enough for the receptionist and the clients in the waiting area to hear clearly. Gambling debts. Or something worse. "I can't believe it, Arthur." "Victoria, that's insane. I didn't take a dime." Dad started, his voice cracking with panic. He stepped toward her to plead his case. "Stay back!" she screamed, recoiling as if he were dangerous. She pulled a folded paper from her pocket and waved it at the guards. "I have an emergency restraining order, granted by the judge this afternoon. He is a threat to the staff and the assets. Get him out." The security guards, seeing the legal paperwork, stepped forward instantly. They grabbed my father by the arms and escorted him out of the building he had built from the ground up. I stood there, frozen in place. I looked at Mom's tear-stained face, and I believed the performance. I watched my dad get thrown out into the rain, and I didn't say a single word to stop it. The next morning, the locks were changed and the passwords were reset. The narrative was set in stone. Mom called an emergency all-hands meeting in the glass-walled conference room. She stood at the head of the table, looking strong but deeply wounded, the perfect picture of a betrayed CEO. "Arthur is struggling with significant mental health issues that have led to financial irregularities," she told the team, her voice steady and commanding. "For the safety of the company and our clients, he has been removed permanently." She turned to me, her eyes gleaming with a strange intensity. "Cassidy will be stepping up as Senior Operations Manager effective immediately. We have to clean up his mess, and I know she is up to the task." The staff clapped nervously, looking from her to me. I felt important. I felt like the savior stepping in to rescue the family legacy from my father's breakdown. That night, I went to visit Dad at a cheap motel on the edge of town. The room smelled like stale smoke and despair. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the blank wall. "I didn't take it, Cass," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "She locked me out. You have to believe me." "The bank records don't lie, Dad," I said coldly, standing by the door with my arms crossed. I wouldn't even sit down. Mom showed me the negative balance. "You need help." I left him there in the dark. I drove home feeling righteous, having no idea that I was the one being played like a fiddle. I threw myself into the job with obsessive dedication. I wanted to prove I could handle the pressure. I spent nights alone in the office, auditing the last 3 quarters, determined to find the mess Dad supposedly left behind. I wanted to find the gambling debts, the secret transfers, anything to make sense of it. I was reconciling the emergency vendor fund, an account we rarely used, when I saw it. A withdrawal for $5,000. It was labeled Deposit KR Solutions. I paused, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I knew every vendor in the tri-state area. I knew the florists, the caterers, the lighting crews, and the rental agencies. We didn't use anyone named KR Solutions. I printed the page and walked into Mom's office. She was texting rapidly, a smile on her face that vanished the second I walked in. She placed the phone face down immediately. "Hey, who is this vendor?" I asked, holding up the paper. "I can't find an invoice for this charge, and it's coded to logistics." She didn't even look up at me. "He's a consultant, a specialist helping with the restructuring. Don't stress the small stuff, honey. Just focus on the upcoming gala. That's what matters right now." Her tone was dismissive. Too dismissive. Usually, Victoria Chase obsessed over every penny. If a stapler went missing, she launched an investigation. My gut tightened. Something was wrong. I walked back to my desk, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like a savior. I felt like a detective. That night, instead of going home to my empty apartment, I stayed late at the office. The cleaning crew vacuumed the hallway, the rhythmic hum masking the sound of my furious typing. As the new senior manager, I had full administrative access to the server. I wasn't hacking. I was doing the job she gave me. I pulled up the complete archive for KR Solutions. My heart hammered against my ribs. It wasn't just that one charge. It was a pattern. There were monthly payments going back 9 months. For $1,000 here, $6,000 there. All authorized by Mom, all buried under different project codes like site development or vendor retainers. I pulled up the company calendar on a second screen. I cross-referenced the dates. Every single time a payment was wired to KR Solutions, Mom was out of town on what she called a client acquisition trip. I felt sick. I copied the tax ID number from one of the digital payment slips and pasted it into the Secretary of State's Business Registry search. KR Solutions was a shell LLC. The registered agent was a generic legal service, which was a dead end. But I dug deeper. I looked at the principal business address listed on the filing. It wasn't a warehouse or an office park. It was 1402 Skyline Avenue, Unit 4B. I stared at the screen, the blue light stinging my eyes. That was a residential address. A luxury condo building downtown. I wasn't looking at legitimate business expenses. I was looking at rent payments for a secret life funded by my father's company. A week later, Mom finally introduced him. She called me into the conference room, beaming like she had just won the lottery. "Cassidy, this is Kennedy," she said, gesturing to the man standing by the window. "He's the consultant helping us restructure the debt." Kennedy turned around. He was slick. He wore an expensive tailored suit, had perfectly whitened teeth, and wore an arrogant smile that didn't reach his eyes. He walked over and shook my hand, his grip uncomfortably tight, asserting dominance. "I've heard a lot about you," he said, his voice smooth. "Heard you're doing a great job cleaning up the disaster your father left behind. He really did a number on the books, didn't he?" He handed me a business card. Kennedy Rogers, strategic consultant. I looked at the card and then my blood ran cold. I glanced at his wrist. He was wearing a brand new, gold-rimmed chronograph watch. It looked heavy, expensive. I remembered a receipt I had filed just yesterday in the office supplies folder. The receipt was from Cartier for a watch valued at $8,500. But in the accounting ledger, my mother had manually entered that same charge as consultant retainer. I looked back up at his face. Kennedy Rogers, KR Solutions. And I knew, without even checking, that if I Googled him, he would live at 1402 Skyline Avenue. He was so arrogant that he was wearing the stolen money on his wrist, right in front of me. I forced myself to smile back. "Yeah," I said, my voice flat. "It's a lot of work." I excused myself, walked calmly to the staff bathroom, locked the door, and threw up. I knew if I confronted them right then, I would lose everything. Mom would fire me, cut my access to the server, and spin a story that I was unstable just like Dad. Dad would lose his only chance at clearing his name. I realized I had to become a double agent. I started joining Mom for lunch every day. I nodded along when she complained about Dad. "He's just so out of it, Mom," I lied, stabbing my salad with a fork. "You honestly did the right thing kicking him out. The company is better off." I watched her shoulders relax. She exhaled. She stopped hiding her phone screen when I walked by. She stopped hovering over my shoulder when I was on the computer. I was earning her trust back. But the hardest part was treating Dad like a stranger. He called me one afternoon, his voice desperate. "Cassie, I need money for a lawyer. I found one who might listen to my side." Mom was in the next room, the door open. I knew she was listening to every word. "I can't help you if you're going to keep lying, Dad." I shouted into the phone, my heart breaking as I said the words. "Stop asking me for money we don't have. You need to take responsibility." I slammed the phone down. Mom walked in and squeezed my shoulder, a proud smile on her face. "I'm proud of you," she said. "That was hard, but it was necessary." I waited until she left. Then I went to my car and cried for an hour. 2 months into my investigation, Mom decided to redecorate her office. She wanted everything modern and fresh to match the new direction of the company. She started tossing boxes of old files and electronics into a bin for recycling. "Get rid of this junk," she told me, waving a hand at a cardboard box filled with cables and old phones. "I want a clean slate, no reminders of the past." I volunteered to take it to the electronics recycling center. As soon as I got to my apartment, I dumped the box onto my living room floor. At the bottom, under tangled cords, was an old company tablet. I pressed the power button. It still had a charge. My breath hitched. It was still logged into her cloud account. She hadn't changed the password since 2018 because she was terrible with technology. I sat on my floor, scrolling through the iMessage history. It went back 2 years. Kennedy wasn't a new consultant. He was her boyfriend. But as I read, I realized it was worse than an affair. Kennedy, how much longer until we can dump the dead weight? Mom, just need to get him to sign over the equity. If we stress him out enough, he'll crack. We just need to break him. They weren't just cheating. They were psychologically torturing my father on purpose to steal his half of the business. I sat there for hours, reading every single message, feeling a cold rage building in my chest. I dug deeper into the sent folder of her email account, synced to the tablet. That's when I found the smoking gun regarding their future plans. It was a draft email addressed to a commercial real estate agent. The subject line read, "Liquidation strategy." The plan was outlined in black and white text. Once the divorce was final and they had secured full ownership of prestige events by declaring Dad incompetent, they weren't going to save the company. They were going to sell the building, liquidate all the assets, and open a brand new agency called K&B Group. The kicker? They structured the finances so Dad would be left holding the corporate debt, which they were intentionally racking up right now via KR Solutions, and the tax liability for the previous years. They were going to leave him homeless, bankrupt, and possibly in prison for tax fraud while they ran off with the cash. This wasn't a messy divorce. This was a calculated, multi-million-dollar heist, and they were using me to help them pull it off. I took a screenshot and backed it up to 3 different drives. I finally knew exactly what I was fighting. 3 weeks before the court date, the atmosphere in the office shifted. It became suffocating. Mom called me into her office, shutting the door behind me. Kennedy was sitting in my father's leather chair, his feet resting on the desk, looking like he already owned the place. "Cassidy," Mom said, her voice unusually soft. She slid a single sheet of paper across the desk toward me. "We need an affidavit for the judge. It's just a formality. We need a statement saying that you witnessed Arthur's violent outbursts at work." I froze. I stared at the paper. My father had never raised a hand to anyone in his life. He was the man who carried spiders outside in a cup rather than killing them. I never saw him hit anyone, I said carefully, testing the waters. "Emotional violence is violence," Kennedy chimed in, his voice smooth as oil. He didn't even look up from his phone. He yelled. He threw things. "You remember that, right?" Mom looked at me, her eyes hard and unblinking. "We need this to protect the company assets, Cass. This is for your inheritance. If he gets half, the company goes under and we all lose everything. Do you want to lose your job? Your future?" I picked up the pen. My hand felt heavy. "I'll write it tonight," I lied, looking her in the eye. "I want to word it perfectly so the judge doesn't have any doubts." That night, my phone rang at 2 a.m. It was the manager of the motel where Dad was staying. "Your dad, he's in a bad way. You need to come down here." I threw on a coat and drove 90 miles an hour down the highway. When I got to room 104, the door was ajar. I found Dad sitting on the cold tile floor of the bathroom, sobbing. He was clutching the divorce papers in one hand. "I can't do it, Cass," he choked out, looking up at me with bloodshot eyes. "Everyone thinks I'm a criminal. Even you. I have nothing left." I couldn't hold it back anymore. The act had to drop. I knelt down on the dirty floor and grabbed his shoulders, shaking him gently. "Dad, look at me. Listen to me. I know everything." He blinked, confused. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a thick envelope of cash, my entire savings withdrawal. I shoved it into his hand. "I need you to survive 2 more weeks. Can you do that?" I whispered fiercely. "I have a plan. I have proof. But you have to trust me, and you have to stay quiet. If you react now, we lose. You have to play the broken man for just a little longer." He looked at me, and for the first time in months, I saw a flicker of hope in his eyes. The week of the trial arrived, and the pressure was unbearable. Mom hired a high-priced lawyer named Mr. Blake, a man known for destroying reputations. We met in his glass-walled conference room for witness preparation. "We need tears," Blake said, pacing the room like a shark. "When you talk about the Christmas party where he lunged at your mother, I need you to break down. The judge needs to feel your fear." There was no Christmas party incident. Mom had tripped over an extension cord while dancing, and Dad had caught her to stop her from falling. They were twisting a moment of care into an act of violence. "I can do that," I said, keeping my face perfectly blank. "Good girl," Kennedy said from the corner. He was pouring himself a drink from the office bar, celebrating a victory he hadn't won yet. "She's tough, unlike her old man." I imagined grabbing the heavy crystal decanter and smashing it over his head. The rage burned in my chest, hot and sharp. Instead, I smiled a tight, polite smile. "I just want this over with." "It will be soon," Mom said, patting my hand. "Then we can finally be a real family." 2 days before the trial, chaos erupted at the house. Mom was searching frantically for her birth certificate to update some legal forms regarding the company transfer. "Cassidy, check the wall's safe," she yelled from the bedroom. "I can't remember if I put it there. The code is your birthday." I opened the safe hidden behind the painting in her study. The birth certificate was there, sitting on top of a stack of bonds. But as I pulled the certificate out, the velvet liner of the jewelry box shelf shifted. It was loose. I lifted the liner. Underneath, tucked away like a secret treasure, was a folded piece of paper. I pulled it out. It was a receipt from the Grandview Hotel. The date was exactly 9 months ago, the same weekend she swore under oath she was alone, finding herself in the mountains. I scanned the paper. It was for the honeymoon suite. And there, at the bottom, listed under guest 2, it was scrawled, clearly, Kennedy R. It was the physical link I had been missing. She hadn't destroyed it because she was sentimental. She had kept it as a romantic souvenir of their first getaway. This piece of paper destroyed her entire victim narrative. I slipped the receipt into my pocket just as she walked into the room. The trial began, and it was a bloodbath from the start. Mr. Blake was brutal. He called character witnesses who had only heard Mom's side of the story. He produced a psychological evaluation, paid for by Kennedy, claiming Dad was mentally unfit and paranoid. Then came the calculated strike. Blake held up a stack of financial transfers I had never seen before. "Your Honor, we have evidence that Arthur Chase used a shell company called KR Solutions to siphon funds, and he manipulated his daughter, Cassidy, into authorizing the transfers to it." My blood ran cold. I looked at Mom. She was staring straight ahead, refusing to meet my eyes. It was a brilliant evil trap. By claiming KR Solutions belonged to Dad, they explained away the missing money. And by saying I authorized it, which I did unknowingly, they forced me to stick to their story. If I denied knowing about the fraud, I looked incompetent. If I admitted I sent the money, I looked like an accomplice. The judge looked at me with pity. "Does the witness have counsel regarding these potential charges?" I felt the room spinning. I wasn't just a witness anymore. I was a pawn. If I didn't play this perfectly, I wasn't just going to lose the case. I was going to prison. I asked the judge for a 5-minute recess. He looked annoyed, but he granted it. I walked out of the courtroom and into the bathroom, my hand shaking so hard I could barely lock the stall door. They thought this move would scare me into silence. They thought I would plead the fifth or take a deal to save myself, leaving Dad to rot. They underestimated how much I had learned from watching them lie. I looked in the mirror. I splashed cold water on my face. I wasn't the scared 25-year-old girl who believed her mother was a saint anymore. I was the one holding the grenade. I returned to the lobby and opened my heavy leather bag. Inside, I had organized the Kennedy folder with colored tabs. Tab red, embezzlement. Tab blue, adultery. Tab black, conspiracy to commit fraud. I didn't need a lawyer to defend me. I needed a microphone. I walked back into the courtroom. Mom looked at me, a warning in her eyes. Her look said, "Sit down and shut up or you go down too." I walked straight past the defense table and took my seat in the witness stand. The bailiff swore me in. I looked at Mr. Blake. "I'm ready," I said. This brings us back to the moment the story began. I sat in the witness chair, the leather squeaking beneath me. The room was freezing, but my blood was boiling. Mr. Blake approached the stand, confident and smug. He thought I was cornered. "Cassidy," he began, his voice booming for the jury. Did your father, Arthur, instruct you to send money to his shell company, KR Solutions? The courtroom went dead silent. Dad had his head in his hands, unable to watch his daughter bury him. I leaned into the microphone. My voice was steady, clearer than it had been in months. No, I said. My father didn't instruct me to do anything. Blake smiled, turning to the jury. Good. So you admit that the financial irregularities were his doing alone? But I interrupted, my voice sharp, cutting through his narrative. As the senior manager who performed the internal audit, I did find who really owns KR Solutions. And it isn't my father. Mom's smile vanished instantly. Kennedy, sitting in the third row, sat up straight, his eyes narrowing. The air in the room shifted. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the prosecutor. Objection! Blake shouted, sensing the trap. The witness is non-responsive. This is irrelevant. Overruled, the judge said, leaning forward, intrigued. Go on, Ms. Chase. I reached into my folder and pulled out the papers. Your Honor, I said, addressing the judge directly. I retrieved these certified filings from the Secretary of State's database this morning, so they are newly discovered impeachment evidence. Exhibit A, I said, holding up the document. The principal business address for KR Solutions is listed as 1402 Skyline Avenue, Unit 4B. This is not my father's address. I pointed a shaking finger at the gallery. That is the current residence of Mr. Kennedy Rogers, my mother's consultant. Kennedy froze. The jury turned to look at him. Exhibit B, I continued, my voice gaining power. A receipt from Cartier for $8,500 that matches the new watch on Mr. Rogers' wrist. In the company ledger, my mother entered this charge as a retainer. I looked directly at my mother. She looked pale, like she was seeing a ghost. And Exhibit C, a hotel invoice for the Grandview Hotel dated 9 months ago, charged to the company. The guest listed is Kennedy Rogers. The courtroom erupted into chaos. She stole those records. Mom screamed, standing up and knocking her chair over. She's lying. She's ungrateful. That tablet was company property. Her mask slipped completely. She wasn't the grieving, victimized wife anymore. She was the tyrant we had lived with behind closed doors. By claiming the tablet was company property, she inadvertently admitted the evidence on it was real. The jury saw her face twisted in rage. Sit down, Mrs. Chase, the judge bellowed, banging his gavel. I saw movement in the corner of my eye. Kennedy was trying to slip out the back doors of the courtroom. Bailiff, the judge ordered, pointing a finger at the door. Do not let that man leave this room. 2 officers blocked Kennedy's path. He looked trapped, his slick confidence gone. Dad lifted his head. He looked at me, confusion turning into realization, and then finally into pride. He sat up straighter. I didn't stop there. I have the text messages, Your Honor, I said, handing the file to the clerk. They planned to liquidate the company and leave my father with the debt. It was all premeditated fraud. The judge didn't just rule. He dropped the hammer. He looked at the evidence, the shell company, the fake invoices, the perjury, and his face hardened. This court finds credible evidence of criminal fraud, the judge announced, his voice booming. Mr. Rogers, you are remanded into custody pending a federal inquiry. Bailiff, take him. As the officers handcuffed Kennedy, the judge turned to my mother. Mrs. Chase, you are hereby removed as CEO of Prestige Events effective immediately. An independent receiver will take control of the company. You are barred from the premises. The gavel slammed down like a gunshot. It was over. As the courtroom cleared out, I saw Mom standing by her car in the parking lot. She wasn't just crying. She was trembling. She had lost the company, her lover, and her reputation in a single hour. She saw us coming and tried to approach, desperation in her eyes. Cassidy, please, she sobbed, reaching out a hand. I did it for us. I did it so we could have a better life. You have to understand, I have nothing else. I didn't even slow down. I walked past her like she was a ghost. I opened the passenger door of my car for Dad. You drive, honey, Dad said, a smile breaking through his tears. He looked lighter, as if a heavy weight had finally been lifted. "Let's go home." I got in the driver's seat and started the engine, leaving her standing alone in the empty lot. She wanted me to lie for the family, so I told the truth. For the real family,